The year was 2319, and humanity had spent the last 90 years trying to be polite. It had taken Earth a long time to reach the stars. When humans finally built ships fast enough to cross the gaps between solar systems, they found the galaxy already full. Over 400 species had formed a massive alliance called the Galactic Concord, and they had been running things for thousands of years before humans even learned to make fire. So when Earth asked to join, the Concord said yes, but in the same way a group of adults might let a small child sit at their table. They smiled. They nodded. They didn't take humans seriously. And humans, for the most part, accepted it. They kept their heads down, traded fairly, followed the rules, and slowly built a small but steady presence across the galaxy. They placed embassies on dozens of stations. They sent merchants to distant markets. They were careful. They were patient. They were quiet. That was their first mistake, the galaxy would later say. Not because being quiet was wrong, but because everyone confused it for being weak. Axiom 9 was a trade station the size of a small city, floating in orbit around a massive gas giant in the Velan system. It was considered neutral ground. Over 60 species kept offices and shops there, and it was one of the busiest trading hubs in the outer sectors. Earth maintained a modest diplomatic team on the station, a handful of officials, a small security squad, and a few families who lived in the human quarter. Among those families were the Vasquezes. Marco Vasquez was a mid-ranking trade attaché. His wife, Elena, worked as a logistics coordinator for Earth's shipping operations. They had one daughter, Lena, age 7, who had been born on the station and had never known anything else. She spoke 3 languages, 2 of them alien. She had friends from 5 different species. She liked drawing pictures of ships and collecting small stones from the station's botanical gardens. Everyone on Axiom 9 knew Lena. She was the kind of child who smiled at strangers and asked too many questions, and made even the grumpiest alien merchants soften a little when she walked by. The Rithani tea cellar on level 6 always saved her a warm cup of honey water. The old Brevari mechanic in the docking bay let her sit in his workshop and watch him fix engines. She was small and bright and completely unafraid of the universe. That was what made what happened next so unforgivable. The Dravari Dominion had been causing trouble for months. They were an insectoid species, tall, armored, with sharp mandibles and cold black eyes. They had built their empire through conquest, and they respected only one thing: strength. For years, they had been pushing their borders outward, claiming resource-rich systems that sat near human trade lanes. The Conquered told them to stop. They didn't listen. Negotiations dragged on, and the Dravari grew bolder with every passing week. Their delegation on Axiom 9 was led by Subcommander Vreth, a career military officer with open contempt for what he called soft species. He had made his feelings about humans very clear. At a formal dinner 2 weeks earlier, he had looked directly at Ambassador Yun Seojin, Earth's senior diplomat on the station, and said, in front of 40 delegates, "Your species builds nothing worth taking. You are noise." Ambassador Yun had smiled politely and sipped her wine. She did not respond. Vreth took that as confirmation. On the morning of the incident, Lena had slipped away from her parents during a busy trading hour. It was not unusual. The station was safe, or so everyone believed, and Lena often wandered the public areas near the diplomatic quarter. She liked the botanical garden on level 4, where tall alien trees grew under artificial sunlight and small fountains made soft sounds that reminded her of rain. She was sitting on a bench, drawing a picture of a purple flower she had found, when the Dravari soldiers came. There were 6 of them. They moved fast and said nothing. One of them grabbed Lena by the arm. She screamed. A Brevari merchant nearby shouted in protest, but a Dravari soldier shoved him to the ground. Within 30 seconds, Lena was gone, carried through a service corridor into the Dravari-controlled section of the station. The whole thing was caught on security cameras. Dozens of alien witnesses saw it happen. 20 minutes later, Subcommander Vreth appeared on a station-wide broadcast. He held Lena in front of the camera. She was crying, her small hands shaking, her drawing crumpled on the floor somewhere behind her. Vreth's message was short and brutal. He declared Lena a leverage asset. He demanded that Earth withdraw all territorial claims in 3 contested star systems within 48 hours. If they refused, the child would be, in his words, processed as biological salvage. The galaxy heard the message. Every species on Axiom 9, every conquered member with an embassy, every intelligence agency monitoring the station's feeds, they all heard it. And they did nothing. Oh, there were statements. The Rithani Collective expressed deep concern. The Brevari Federation called for calm dialogue. The Concord's High Council scheduled an emergency session for 3 days later. 3 days. A child had been taken and they scheduled a meeting. Commander Idris Akafer, the head of Earth's 12-person security detachment on Axiom 9, stood in the human quarters operations room and watched the broadcast with a face made of stone. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with calm brown eyes that had seen combat on 4 different worlds. He said nothing for a long time. Then he turned to his team. "Lock down our section, full defensive posture, no one in or out without my authorization." His soldiers moved without a word. Ambassador Yun Seojin sat alone in her office. She had watched Vreth's broadcast on her personal screen. She had seen Lena crying. She had known that little girl since the day she was born. She had held her as a baby. She had attended her birthday parties. She had once spent an entire afternoon helping Lena build a model spaceship out of cardboard and tape. Yun closed her eyes. She pressed her hands flat on her desk. She breathed in and she breathed out. Then she opened a secure terminal and typed a 2-word message on a channel so heavily encrypted that only 3 people in the galaxy had access to it. The message was Cobalt Sunrise. She sent it, then she closed the terminal, folded her hands, and waited. 12 light-years away, deep inside a mountain in Switzerland, a console lit up in a room that officially did not exist. The room was buried under 1,000 meters of granite, shielded against every form of detection known to science. It had been built 200 years ago, and it had never been used. Not once. Fleet Admiral Marin Cole was 61 years old. She had white hair cut short, sharp gray eyes, and the kind of quiet authority that made entire rooms fall silent when she walked in. She had commanded ships, fleets, and entire theaters of operation. She had hoped, truly, deeply hoped, that she would retire without ever seeing the words now glowing on her screen. Cobalt Sunrise. She stared at them for exactly 2 seconds. Then she picked up a direct line to the United Earth Defense Command and spoke 6 words that would change the history of the galaxy. "Wake them all up, every single one." Across the Sol system, in shipyards hidden inside asteroids, in orbital platforms disguised as research stations, in deep space hangars that no alien sensor had ever detected, lights began to turn on. Engines that had been cold for decades began to hum. Crews who had trained their entire lives for a day they hoped would never come received a single coded ping on their personal devices. The message was the same for all of them. HFY active. Report immediately. And on Axiom 9, in a small locked room in the Dravari section, a 7-year-old girl clutched a stuffed rabbit to her chest and whispered to it, "Don't be scared. Someone will come." She was right. Everyone was coming. The first thing the galaxy noticed was the silence. It started small. A human cargo ship scheduled to dock at a Brevari trading post simply changed course without explanation. A diplomatic call between Earth's embassy on Rithani Prime and the local government was cancelled, no reason given. A human news network that broadcast across 40 systems went off the air mid-sentence. Within 3 hours of Lena's capture, every single human communication channel in the galaxy went dark. Embassies stopped answering calls. Trade offices closed their doors. Merchant convoys that had been sailing steady routes for decades turned around and headed for the nearest Earth-controlled port. Military vessels on routine patrol quietly changed heading and vanished from sensor range. It was as if every human in the galaxy had taken a single, collective breath and held it. On Axiom 9, the change was immediate and unsettling. The human quarter, normally a lively place full of music and cooking smells and children playing, went completely still. Blast shutters lowered over windows, doors sealed. The corridor lights dimmed to a low, cold blue. Commander Akafer's security team stood at the entrance checkpoints in full tactical gear, visors down, weapons visible. They spoke to no one. They looked at no one. They simply stood there like statues carved from iron. Alien residents of the station began to whisper. "What are they doing?" a Brevari merchant asked a colleague. "Nothing," his colleague replied. "That is what worries me." Sub-Commander Vreth noticed the silence too, but he interpreted it differently. In the Dravari Dominion, silence from an enemy meant submission. It meant they were afraid and trying to think of how to surrender with the least shame. Vreth had seen it many times during the Dominion's conquests. The weak always went quiet before they gave in. He smiled, or made the closest expression his mandibles allowed, and decided to press harder. 12 hours after the initial broadcast, Vreth dragged Lena in front of the cameras again. She was still in the same clothes. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, but she had stopped making sounds. She just stared at the camera with a look that was far too old for a 7-year-old face. Vreth clicked his mandibles and addressed the feed. "Humanity's silence speaks clearly," he said. "They know they cannot fight. They know they are small. I will give them 12 more hours to accept our terms. After that, the child becomes property of the Dominion, to be used as we see fit." He cut the feed. Across the station in the human quarter, Ambassador Yun Seojin watched the broadcast on a small screen in her office. She was still sitting in the same chair she had been in for hours. A cup of tea sat in front of her, cold and untouched. Her face showed nothing. Her aide, a young man named Daniel, stood in the doorway. His hands were shaking. "Ambassador," he said quietly, should we respond? Should we say something?" Yun looked at him. Her eyes were calm and clear, and somehow that was more frightening than if she had been screaming. "No," she said. "We have already said everything that needs to be said." Daniel didn't understand. He wouldn't, not yet, not until he saw what was coming. Far from Axiom 9, in the Sol system, the thing called Operation Hearthfire was unfolding with the precision of a clock. Earth's United Defense Force had been planning for this kind of moment for over a century. Not this specific scenario. No one had imagined someone would be foolish enough to take a human child, but the general principle. The day when someone pushed too far. The day when patience stopped being a strategy and became a liability. Hearthfire was not a battle plan. It was a transformation. It was the process by which Earth went from a quiet, polite member of the galactic community to something else entirely. The first phase was mobilization. Every active-duty soldier, pilot, engineer, and medic in the Defense Force received their orders within minutes of Admiral Cole's command. Reserve units, millions of trained civilians who had kept their skills sharp through mandatory annual exercises, were activated. Shipyard workers who had been building freighters and exploration vessels received new instructions. The freighters could wait. The exploration vessels could wait. Everything could wait. The second phase was assembly. Earth's fleet was scattered across dozens of systems. Cole ordered a full recall. Every warship, every carrier, every support vessel, all of them were to converge on a single staging point in deep space, far from any prying alien sensors. The coordination required was enormous, but human military logistics had been quietly perfected over decades, practiced in secret exercises that the conquered never knew about. The third phase was the one that would have made the galaxy tremble if they had known about it. The Leviathans. There were 7 of them, and they were Earth's deepest secret. Each one was over 4 kilometers long, massive, angular vessels bristling with weapon systems that human engineers had spent 50 years designing and building in total secrecy. The Concorde's intelligence services had detected the construction, of course. It was hard to hide something that big, but human diplomats had explained them away as orbital construction platforms, civilian projects, industrial infrastructure. The Concorde had believed them. Why wouldn't they? Humans were a young race, a quiet race. They built trading ships and exploration probes, not weapons of war. That was what everyone thought. Inside the Leviathans, crews that had trained in simulation for years stepped aboard their actual ships for the first time. Engine cores that had never been fired beyond testing levels roared to life. Weapons systems ran through automated checks and reported ready. Navigation computers plotted jump coordinates to the Velan system. Admiral Cole stood on the bridge of the lead Leviathan, the UEDS Wrath of the Cradle, and reviewed the fleet disposition on a holographic display. 212 warships, 47 support vessels, 18 fighter carriers, 7 Leviathans. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled, and it had come together in under 10 hours. Her flag captain, a sharp-eyed woman named Tors, approached with a datapad. "Ma'am, the Concorde High Council has sent a message. They're requesting a status update on Earth's military movements. Several species have detected our ship recalls and are asking questions." Cole took the datapad and read the message. It was full of careful diplomatic language, polite requests, gentle inquiries, expressions of shared concern. It said a lot of words without actually saying anything useful. She typed a single sentence in reply. "You had 12 hours to retrieve our child. You chose to watch, remember that." She handed the datapad back to Tors. "Send it on all Concorde diplomatic frequencies. I want every species in the galaxy to read it." Tors hesitated for just a moment. "That's going to cause a panic, Admiral." "Good," Cole said. On Rithani Prime, the ancient seat of the galaxy's oldest telepathic civilization, Ambassador Solanvar felt something he had never felt before. The Rithani could sense the emotions of other species at great distances. It was their gift and their curse. They had read the emotional signatures of hundreds of civilizations across thousands of years. Fear, joy, anger, grief, love, hate. They had felt it all. But this was different. Solanvar stood in the great sensing chamber, a vast domed room designed to amplify telepathic reception across light years, and he listened to what was radiating from human space. It was not panic, it was not confusion, it was not even anger, not in the way he understood anger, which was hot and wild and reckless. This was cold, this was focused. This was an emotion so controlled and so compressed that it felt like a physical weight pressing against his mind. It was rage, yes, but rage that had been folded in on itself 1,000 times until it became something harder than steel. He staggered and gripped the railing. His aide rushed forward. "Ambassador, what is it? What do you sense?" Solanvar looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. In 400 years of life, he had never been afraid of an emotion before. "I have made a career of reading species," he whispered. "I have studied the hearts of conquerors and the minds of saints. I have felt empires rise and fall." He swallowed. "I have never felt anything like what is coming from them right now." His aide stared at him. "What do we do?" Solanvar straightened up. His voice was thin. "We stay out of their way, and we pray they remember that we were not the ones who took their child." On Axiom 9, night cycle fell over the station. The lights dimmed. The corridors grew quiet. Most species retreated to their quarters, unsettled by the tension that hung in the air like a living thing. In the Dravari section, Lena sat on a cold metal floor in a room with no windows. Her stuffed rabbit was pressed tightly against her chest. The Dravari guards outside her door clicked and buzzed to each other in their own language, a sound like knives scraping together. She was hungry, she was scared, she wanted her mother. But somewhere deep inside her 7-year-old heart, in the place where children keep the things they believe most fiercely, she held on to one simple truth. Her people were coming. She didn't know about the ships. She didn't know about the Leviathans or Operation Hearthfire or the 200 warships now screaming through faster-than-light space toward her. She didn't know that an entire civilization had woken up and pointed itself in her direction like an arrow drawn back on a bow. She just knew, the way children know things, that someone would come. And across the dark and silent void between the stars, 200 warships burned toward her like falling angels. Estimated time of arrival, 9 hours. 36 hours had passed since a 7-year-old girl was torn from a garden bench, and the galaxy was beginning to realize that something terrible was about to happen. Not terrible for Lena Vasquez, terrible for everyone else. On Axiom 9, the alien delegations had spent the last day in a state of growing unease. The Brevari had closed their trade offices. The Tohari sealed their embassy and posted armed guards. Even the Rithani, who prided themselves on calm above all things, had quietly begun evacuating non-essential personnel to ships docked in the outer ring. Nobody said the word war out loud, but everyone was thinking it. Subcommander Vreth, however, was not worried. He had contacted the Dravari homeworld and received exactly the answer he expected. The High Command was sending reinforcements, 80 additional warships to join the 30 already stationed in the Velan system. 110 Dravari vessels in total. It was an overwhelming force, more than enough to make any species think twice. Vreth stood in his command center on the station and felt satisfied. The humans had gone quiet. The Conquered was doing nothing, as usual. In a few more hours, Earth would accept his demands, and the Dravari would gain 3 resource-rich systems without firing a single shot. He would be promoted. Perhaps he would even be given a colony to govern. He allowed himself a moment of pride. This had been easy. Then his sensor officer screamed. It was not a shout or an exclamation. It was a scream, raw and involuntary, the kind of sound a person makes when their mind cannot process what their eyes are seeing. "Sub-Commander," the officer gasped, mandibles clicking wildly. "FTL signatures massive, they are, I cannot." He turned from his console with something very close to terror on his insectoid face. "Everywhere. They are everywhere." Vreth strode to the sensor display and looked. For 3 full seconds, he did not move. The display showed the Velan system, the gas giant, the station, the 30 Dravari warships in their patrol formation. And then, appearing all at once across every sector of the system like stars being born, were the signatures. Over 200 of them. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect unison. Not staggered, not scattered, not in ragged groups the way most fleets arrived after a long jump. They appeared simultaneously, as if a single hand had placed them on the board like chess pieces. The formation was a perfect sphere, centered on Axiom 9, enclosing the station and every Dravari ship within it. And then the Leviathans arrived. 7 new signatures, each one so large that the sensor system initially classified them as small moons. They took positions in a slow, deliberate orbit around the station, unhurried, almost lazy, like predators circling prey they had already decided to eat. Each Leviathan was over 4 kilometers long. Their hulls were dark and angular, covered in arrays of weapons that no alien intelligence service had ever catalogued. They moved with a grace that should have been impossible for something so massive, their engines producing an eerie blue glow that lit up the void around them. On the observation decks of Axiom 9, hundreds of aliens pressed against the windows and stared. Many of them had spent their entire careers in space. They had seen warships from a dozen different species. They had studied fleet tactics and military theory. None of them had ever seen anything like this. A Brevari naval officer, watching from the trading quarter, dropped his drink on the floor. His companion turned to him in alarm. What is it?" The officer pointed at the nearest Leviathan with a trembling claw. "That ship," he said slowly, "has more firepower than our entire home fleet, and there are 7 of them." He looked at his companion. "The humans told us those were construction platforms." His companion stared at the massive vessel crawling past the observation window. "They lied." "No," the officer said quietly. "They let us believe what we wanted to believe. That is much worse." Inside the human quarter, Commander Akafor stood at his post and watched the fleet arrive on his tactical display. For the first time in 36 hours, the smallest trace of a smile crossed his face. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Ambassador Yun stood beside him, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression perfectly composed. She had known this was coming. She had known it from the moment she sent those 2 words. But seeing it, actually seeing the full weight of Earth's hidden strength arranged in the sky above her, still made her heart beat faster. Then the broadcast came. Every speaker, every screen, every communication device on Axiom 9 and across the entire Velen system carried the same voice. It was calm. It was clear. It was the voice of Fleet Admiral Marin Cole, and it cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. "This is Fleet Admiral Marin Cole of the United Earth Defense Force." On the station, everyone stopped moving. Dravari soldiers froze at their posts. Alien diplomats paused mid-step. Even the background hum of the station's life support systems seemed to grow quieter. 40 hours ago, agents of the Dravari Dominion abducted a 7-year-old human child from neutral ground, a place where she should have been safe, a place where the Galactic Concord guaranteed her safety. Cole's voice carried no emotion. That was what made it so devastating. There was no anger, no grief, no trembling outrage. Just facts, delivered with the flat precision of a surgeon describing an incision. "We asked for no help, we received none. The Concord watched. The Concord scheduled meetings. The Concord expressed concern." A pause. "Let the record show for all time we remember who watched." Across the galaxy, Concord diplomats who were monitoring the feed felt those words land like a slap. The Rithani ambassador closed his eyes. The Brevari foreign minister put her head in her hands. Even species who had nothing to do with the incident felt a cold weight settle in their stomachs because they all knew that Cole was right. They had watched. They had done nothing. Cole continued. "To the Dravari Dominion, you have 1 hour to return Lena Vasquez unharmed to human custody. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. There will not be a second warning." The broadcast ended. For 10 seconds, the Velen system was completely silent. Then chaos erupted. On Axiom 9, half a dozen alien delegations began emergency evacuations simultaneously. Corridors flooded with panicked civilians rushing toward the docking bays. Ships that had been powered down for weeks fired up their engines in minutes. A Tohari freighter captain was so desperate to leave that he undocked without clearance and scraped his hull against the station's outer ring. The Dravari fleet, 30 warships that had been confidently patrolling the system, scrambled into a defensive formation. Their commanders stared at their sensor displays and tried to calculate the odds. They did not like the numbers. Vreth stood in his command center on the station and felt something he had never felt before in his military career. His mandibles were clicking involuntarily, a nervous habit he thought he had trained out of himself decades ago. He contacted the Dravari homeworld on an emergency channel. "High Command," he said, and hated how thin his voice sounded. "The human fleet is here. It is larger than anticipated, significantly larger. I recommend we return the child and withdraw. There is no shame in." "Denied," the High Command responded. "Reinforcements are en route, 80 warships. Hold your position. The Dominion does not bow to young species." The channel closed. Vreth stared at the dead screen. 80 ships. Combined with his 30, that would make 110, against 200 human warships and 7 of those nightmare vessels orbiting the station. He was a military officer. He understood mathematics. He understood force projection. And he understood, with a sick certainty settling in his gut, that the High Command was about to learn a very expensive lesson. On the station, Ambassador Yun activated her communicator and sent a brief message to every neutral species delegation on Axiom 9. The message was simple and direct. Evacuate your personnel from all Dravari-controlled sections. You have 45 minutes. This is not a precaution. This is a warning. The delegations listened. Within minutes, the sections adjacent to Dravari territory were emptying fast. Meanwhile, Commander Akafer gathered his 12-person security team in a small briefing room. He laid a holographic map of the station on the table, specifically the Dravari section where Lena was being held. Red dots marked known guard positions. Blue dots marked security cameras. A single green dot, deep inside the section, marked Lena's estimated location. The fleet will handle what's outside, Akafer said quietly. We handle what's inside. Our job is simple. We get Lena, we bring her home. He looked at each of his soldiers. They looked back with steady eyes. The crates we shipped in last year marked as agricultural equipment, he continued. A thin smile crossed his face. Open them. The crates, which had passed through Axiom 9's customs inspectors without a second glance, did not contain agricultural equipment. They contained combat drones, 12 of them, each the size of a large dog, armored, fast, and equipped with both lethal and non-lethal weapon systems. They had been sitting in the human quarters storage bay for 14 months, waiting for a day that Akafer had prayed would never come. His soldiers unpacked them with practiced hands. The drones powered up silently, their optical sensors glowing a faint red in the dim storage room. Akafer checked his watch. 42 minutes until the Admiral's deadline. He looked at the green dot on the map, the dot that represented a small girl who liked drawing flowers and collecting stones. We go in at 0 hour, he said. Not 1 second before, not 1 second after, and we bring her out, whatever it takes. His team nodded. Outside the station, the Dravari reinforcements dropped out of FTL, 80 warships, bristling with weapons, arranged in an aggressive attack formation. They joined the original 30 and formed a massed fleet of 110 vessels. Against the human sphere of 200 warships and 7 leviathans, they looked like a handful of stones thrown at a mountain. The clock ticked down. On the bridge of the Wrath of the Cradle, Admiral Cole sat in her command chair and watched the timer on her display count toward 0. Her face was carved from granite. Her hands rested on the arms of her chair without the slightest tremor. Captain Torres stood beside her. Admiral, the Dravari are not responding to our ultimatum. Their reinforcements have arrived. They appear to be forming an offensive line. Cole nodded slowly. They think numbers matter. Do they not, ma'am? Cole looked at her captain with eyes that held no mercy and no doubt. Not today. The timer reached 0. Admiral Cole leaned forward. Her voice filled every bridge, every cockpit, every battle station in the human fleet. Time's up, all ships weapons free. The Dravari had fought many wars. They had conquered 14 species. Their military academies taught that victory belonged to the side with greater numbers, stronger armor, and a willingness to accept casualties. By every metric they understood, 110 warships should have been enough to hold the line against any enemy. They were wrong. The first shots came from the human destroyers on the outer ring of the formation. They fired directed energy lances, weapons that the Conquered's intelligence agencies had never documented, because humans had never used them in public. The lances were invisible to the naked eye, traveling at the speed of light, and they hit Dravari shields with the force of a collapsing star. The shields lasted approximately 1.4 seconds. The lead Dravari cruiser, a vessel called the Iron Fang, commanded by a decorated veteran of 3 campaigns, simply broke apart. There was no explosion, no dramatic fireball. The energy lance cut through the shield, through the hull, through the reactor core, and out the other side. The ship split in two like a piece of fruit cut with a knife. Its halves drifted apart in the vacuum, glowing red at the edges where metal had been superheated. The Iron Fang's destruction took less than 2 seconds. Its crew of 800 never had time to understand what happened. Across the Dravari formation, alarms began screaming. The human fleet moved with a coordination that defied everything the galaxy knew about multi-ship combat. 200 warships operated as a single organism, each one anticipating the movements of the others, filling gaps, creating crossfire lanes, and cutting off escape routes with a fluidity that looked almost choreographed. Fighter wings launched from the carriers and swept through the battle space in tight formations, their pilots executing maneuvers with a precision that the Dravari, a hive-minded insectoid species who believed coordinated movement was their greatest advantage, found deeply and profoundly disturbing. The humans were not supposed to be able to do this. Mammals were individuals. They argued and competed and struggled with each other. They were not supposed to move like one. But the Dravari had made a critical error in their understanding of humanity. They had confused individuality with disunity. Humans were individuals, yes, fiercely so. But when something threatened their own, when something touched the things they loved, those millions of individual wills snapped together into something harder and sharper than any hive mind could achieve. Because a hive mind cooperated out of biology, humans cooperated out of choice. And there was nothing in the galaxy more dangerous than a species that chose, freely and with full awareness, to become a single weapon. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 22 minutes. In those 22 minutes, 74 Dravari warships were destroyed or disabled. Human kinetic kill vehicles, dense metal slugs accelerated to 30% of the speed of light, punched through capital ships like needles through paper. Electronic warfare suites blinded Dravari sensors and scrambled their communications, leaving individual ships unable to coordinate or even identify where the attacks were coming from. Dravari fighters launched in desperate waves and were cut apart by human interceptors before they could form up. The 7 Leviathans did not fire a single shot. They didn't need to. The conventional fleet handled everything. The Leviathans simply orbited the battle space in their slow, unhurried paths, their weapons arrays dark, their massive silhouettes visible against the glow of the gas giant. They were a message, a promise, a statement that said, very clearly, this is what we can do without even trying. Imagine what happens if we actually try. A Brevari military analyst, watching a sensor feed from a fleeing merchant ship, would later describe it in a report that became famous across the Concord. The humans fought with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a predator. They did not waste ammunition. They did not pursue the fleeing. They did not target escape pods. They simply dismantled the Dravari fleet with the calm efficiency of someone taking apart a machine they had built and understood completely. At the 17-minute mark, the remaining Dravari ships broke formation and ran. 36 vessels, many of them damaged, turned and fled toward open space at maximum speed. The human fleet let them go. Not a single pursuing shot was fired. Admiral Cole watched them run on her tactical display and said nothing. Captain Torres glanced at her. "Ma'am, should we pursue?" "No," Cole said. "Let them carry the message home. Living witnesses are more useful than dead enemies." While the space battle raged outside, a different kind of fight was happening inside Axiom 9. Commander Akafer moved through the station's corridors like a ghost. His 12 soldiers and 12 combat drones advanced in perfect silence through service tunnels and maintenance shafts, bypassing the main corridors where Dravari patrols still walked. They had memorized the station's layout down to every air vent and power conduit. Akafor had spent 14 months studying this station, learning its bones, planning for a day he hoped would never come. Now that day was here, and he was ready. They reached the outer perimeter of the Dravari section at exactly 0 hour, the same moment the fleet opened fire outside. It was not a coincidence. The timing was deliberate. The space battle would draw every Dravari officer's attention outward, toward the windows and sensor screens, away from the corridors and doors. Akafor held up a closed fist. His team stopped. He pressed his ear to a sealed door and listened. On the other side, he could hear the clicking of Dravari mandibles, agitated, panicked, focused on the battle reports flooding in from outside. He looked at his team. He held up 3 fingers, 2, 1. The door blew inward. The flashbang grenades went first, devices specifically calibrated for multi-species environments. Designed to overwhelm Dravari compound eyes and disrupt their vibration-based communication. The effect was devastating. 6 Dravari guards in the first room dropped to the floor, clutching their heads, blinded and disoriented. Akafor's team moved through them in seconds. Non-lethal rounds where possible, heavy stun pulses that locked up the Dravari's nervous systems and dropped them like stones. The combat drones swept ahead, their sensors mapping the corridors in real time and marking every heat signature. They encountered resistance in the 3rd corridor. A squad of Dravari soldiers, better trained than the others, had recovered from the initial shock and formed a defensive line. They opened fire with plasma weapons that scorched the walls and filled the air with the smell of burned metal. Akafor's team did not slow down. They split into 2 groups, flanked the defenders from both sides, and eliminated them in 8 seconds. The combat drones handled the rest, pinning down stragglers with suppressive fire while the soldiers pushed forward. It was precise. It was controlled. It was the product of a species that had been fighting wars among itself for 10,000 years and had learned, through oceans of blood and grief, how to be very, very good at it. Akafor reached Lena's holding room 4 minutes after the breach. The door was locked, heavy Dravari security bolts, designed to withstand breaching charges. Akafor didn't bother with the door. He placed a cutting device on the wall beside it and burned through half a meter of station bulkhead in 9 seconds. The wall fell inward with a clang. He stepped through the hole, weapon raised, and swept the room. It was small, cold, no windows, a metal bench along one wall, a single light strip on the ceiling buzzing faintly. And there in the corner, curled into a ball with a stuffed rabbit pressed to her chest, was Lena Vasquez. She looked up at him with wide, dark eyes. Her face was streaked with dried tears. Her hair was tangled. Her clothes were wrinkled and dirty. She was shaking. Akafor lowered his weapon. He pulled off his helmet so she could see his face. He knelt down slowly, the way you approach a frightened animal, and he looked at her at eye level. His voice, when he spoke, cracked for the first time in 36 hours. "Hey, little one," he said softly. "It's me, Commander Akafor. Remember, I came to your birthday party last year." Lena stared at him. Her lower lip trembled. "I'm here now," he said. "We're going home." She launched herself into his arms so hard that she nearly knocked him over. She buried her face in his neck and sobbed great, heaving sobs that shook her whole small body. He wrapped one arm around her and held her tight, and with his free hand he keyed his communicator. "Package secured," he said. His voice was steady again, but his eyes were not. "She's alive, she's safe, we're coming out." On the bridge of the Wrath of the Cradle, Admiral Cole received the message. She closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them, they were bright. "All ships," she said, "stand down offensive operations. The objective is complete." 200 warships held their positions. Weapons powered down but remained ready. The message was clear. We are done, but we are not leaving. On the station, Akafor carried Lena through the corridors of the Dravari section. surrounded by his security team and the hovering combat drones. Dravari soldiers who had surrendered sat on the floor with their hands visible, watched over by human soldiers who said nothing to them. They found Sub-Commander Vreth trying to reach an escape shuttle in the docking bay. He was alone. His guards had abandoned him. He turned a corner and found himself face to face with Akafar's team. Vreth froze. His mandibles clicked once, twice. His compound eyes darted between the armed humans, the drones, and the small girl clinging to Akafar's neck. "On your knees," Akafar said. His voice was quiet and absolutely final. Vreth knelt. They bound his wrists with magnetic restraints and marched him through the station's main concourse, the long, central corridor where every species on Axiom 9 passed through at some point during the day. Word had spread. Hundreds of aliens lined the corridor, watching in silence as the Dravari sub-commander was led past them by human soldiers. Vreth kept his head down. The clicking of his mandibles was the only sound. Admiral Cole's final broadcast of the day was brief. "Lena Vasquez is safe. She is with her people. Hostilities will cease for now. To the Galactic Concord, you may resume your scheduled meeting. We suggest you have something meaningful to say when you do." The channel closed. In the Concord's High Council chamber, 1,000 light-years away, the delegates sat in stunned silence. The battle footage played on a loop on every screen, the Dravari fleet being systematically taken apart in 22 minutes by a species they had called young. The Rithani elder, Ambassador Solinvar, rose slowly from his seat. He was the oldest being in the room. He had watched empires rise and fall. He had counseled patience to 100 species. He had always believed that wisdom came with age and that the young races had much to learn. Now he looked at the footage of 7 Leviathan dreadnoughts orbiting a space station, their weapons still cold, their power still untested, and he felt something he had not felt in 3 centuries. Humility. He addressed the assembly. His voice was quiet, and every being in the chamber heard every word. "For 2 centuries we called them young, we called them soft. We watched them smile and trade and follow our rules, and we believed we understood them." He paused. "We were wrong. They were not young. They were not soft. They were simply patient, and we have just seen what happens when their patience ends." Nobody spoke. "Let the record show," Solinvar continued, "that today a species we dismissed rescued their child with a fleet we never knew they had, using weapons we cannot understand with a coordination that should not be possible. And then they stopped. They could have kept going. They chose not to." He looked around the chamber, meeting every pair of eyes. "That restraint is what frightens me most of all." The galaxy did not return to normal after the Velen incident. It could not. Normal had been built on an assumption that humans were small, young, and harmless, and that assumption was now ash. In the first week, every major intelligence agency in the Concord published emergency assessments. The reports varied in length and detail, but they all arrived at the same conclusion. Humanity had been hiding the true scale of its military capability for at least 50 years. The 7 Leviathan dreadnoughts alone represented a weapons technology that no other species could match. The coordination of the fleet, 200 warships acting as one body, suggested training programs and communication systems that were decades ahead of anything in the Concord's databases. And the most unsettling part, every report agreed, was this: the Leviathans had not fired. Whatever Earth's true ceiling of power was, the galaxy had not seen it, not even close. The Dravari Dominion collapsed from the inside. It did not happen all at once, but the footage of 74 warships being destroyed in 22 minutes, broadcast across every network in the galaxy, cracked the foundation of Dravari society. Their entire civilization was built on the belief that military strength was the only measure of worth. For centuries, they had conquered weaker species and told themselves it proved their superiority. Now they had met a species that was stronger, and it had shown them mercy. That mercy was harder to bear than defeat. A loss in battle could be avenged. A loss in battle where the enemy chose to stop, where the enemy could have destroyed every ship, every colony, every egg chamber on the homeworld, and instead simply held its fire. That was something the Dravari did not have a framework to understand. Within a month, the Dravari High Command was overthrown. The generals who had refused Vreth's request to return Lena were dragged from their chambers by their own officers. A new government formed, led by pragmatists who understood that the old way of thinking had nearly led their species to extinction. The new Dravari leadership contacted Earth within days. They asked for terms. Earth's terms were unusual. There were no territorial demands, no military concessions, no humiliating treaties or forced disarmament. Instead, Earth asked for one thing: reparations. And the reparations were not to be paid to Earth's government or military. They were to be placed in a trust fund in the name of Lena Vasquez, to be used for her education, her welfare, and her future. The symbolism was deliberate. The Dravari had taken a child to gain 3 star systems. Now they would pay for that child's schooling. Every credit they transferred would be a reminder, not of their military defeat, but of the small, frightened girl who had been treated as a bargaining chip. The Dravari agreed without negotiation. They understood the message. Subcommander Vreth was tried by a joint human-Dravari tribunal on Axiom 9. The trial was short. The evidence was clear. He was convicted of kidnapping, violation of neutral territory, and crimes against a protected civilian. The Dravari wanted to execute him according to their own traditions. Earth declined. Instead, Vreth was sentenced to spend the rest of his life on a human-run rehabilitation station, where he would study human history, human art, and human culture until, in the words of the sentencing judge, he understood what he tried to destroy. It was, many observers noted, a punishment far worse than death for a Dravari warrior. The Galactic Concord underwent its own reckoning, slower and more painful. Admiral Cole's words, "We remember who watched," became the most quoted sentence in galactic diplomatic history. It was studied in universities. It was debated in councils. It was whispered in corridors by diplomats who had once felt comfortable in their neutrality and now felt something they were not used to feeling: shame. Because the truth was simple and no amount of diplomatic language could hide it. A child had been taken in plain sight on neutral ground from a station that the Concord guaranteed was safe. And the Concord, 400 species, thousands of warships, countless diplomats and officials and bureaucrats had done nothing. They had scheduled a meeting. They had expressed concern. They had waited. And a single species alone had gone and taken her back. Several elder races moved quickly to repair the damage. The Rithani Collective, whose ambassador, Solanvar, had become the unexpected voice of galactic conscience, proposed a series of reforms to the Concord's emergency response protocols. No more 3-day waiting periods for crisis sessions. No more careful neutrality when civilians were in danger. If a child was taken, if innocents were threatened, the Concord would act immediately and with force. The reforms passed unanimously, which surprised nobody. Voting against them would have been political suicide. But Earth was not satisfied with reforms. Reforms were words on paper, and humans had learned, through centuries of their own history, that words on paper meant nothing without the will to enforce them. Ambassador Yun Seo-jin, who had sat in silence through the entire crisis and emerged as one of the most respected diplomats in the galaxy, was appointed Earth's first representative to a new initiative, the Terran Compact. The compact was simple. It was not a trade agreement or a military alliance or a political bloc. It was a single promise. Any species that joined agreed to the immediate defense of civilians, especially children, in any conflict anywhere without waiting for permission, without consulting councils, without scheduling meetings. 13 species signed in the first week. Within a year, that number reached 40. Within 5 years, over 100 species had joined, including, in a move that shocked everyone, the reformed Dravari Dominion. It was the first interspecies treaty written by humans that others lined up to sign, and it changed the moral architecture of the galaxy. The Compact's founding document contained a single line that Yun had insisted on including. It was not legalistic or diplomatic. It was personal. It read, "No child of any species on any world will ever be used as a weapon again." Fleet Admiral Marin Cole retired 6 months after the Velen incident. She had served Earth for 38 years, and she was tired not of the work but of the weight. She had carried the secret of Hearthfire for over a decade. She had built the Leviathans, trained the crews, and prayed every night that she would never have to use them. When the moment came, she had not hesitated, but she had felt every second of it. Her retirement ceremony was held at Defense Command Headquarters in Geneva. It was attended by military leaders from 12 species, a first in galactic history. When it came time for her to speak, she stood at the podium in her dress uniform, her white hair bright under the lights, and she spoke plainly. "People have asked me why we built the fleet, why we spent 50 years and more money than I can count building weapons we hoped we would never use." She paused. "The answer is not complicated. We built them because we have children, because we have people we love, because somewhere in the universe there will always be someone who looks at something small and sees something to take." She looked out at the crowd, human and alien faces alike, all watching her. "We are not a violent species. We do not want war. We did not reach the stars because we wanted to conquer them. We reached the stars because we were curious, because we wanted to see what was out there, because we dreamed of something bigger than ourselves." Her voice hardened just slightly. "But we will burn the galaxy to its foundations before we let anyone touch our children. That is not a threat. That is not a policy. That is who we are." She stepped down from the podium. The room was silent. Then, one by one, the assembled leaders rose to their feet. Humans first, then Rithani, then Brevari, then Dravari. Every species in the room stood for her. It was the only standing ovation in the history of the United Earth Defense Force. Commander Idris Akafer was promoted to colonel, but he requested reassignment to a quiet border post far from the politics and attention. He was not a man who wanted fame. He was a soldier who had done his job, and he wanted to go back to doing it quietly. Before he left Axiom 9, Lena Vasquez gave him a drawing. It showed 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, holding hands. Around them were stars, crudely drawn but unmistakable. At the top, in the shaky handwriting of a 7-year-old, were the words, "Thank you for finding me." Akafer folded the drawing carefully, placed it in his breast pocket, and wore it there every day for the rest of his career. The Vasquez family was offered the chance to live anywhere on Earth or on any human station in the galaxy. Marco and Alina chose a small coastal town in southern Portugal, where the air smelled like salt and the sound of the ocean filled every room. They wanted Lena to grow up somewhere quiet, somewhere safe, somewhere far from the politics of the stars. Lena went back to school. She made friends. She still drew pictures of ships. She still collected stones. The galaxy knew her name, but she did not know the galaxy, not yet. She was 7 years old and she wanted to be a marine biologist. The Rithani ambassador, Solinvar, visited Earth once, several months after the incident. He traveled to Portugal personally, carrying a small package. He found the Vasquez home on a narrow street overlooking the Atlantic and knocked on the door. Lena answered. Solinvar was tall and thin, with silver skin and large, dark eyes that reflected light like polished glass. He knelt down slowly, with the careful grace of a very old being, and held out the package. "This is for you," he said, "from my people to yours." Lena opened it. Inside was a stuffed rabbit, not a replacement for the one she still had, but a new one made from Rithani silk that shimmered faintly in the sunlight. Its eyes were made from tiny crystals that changed color when you tilted them. Lena looked at it, then looked at Solinvar. She smiled a wide, bright, completely unself-conscious smile and said, "It's beautiful. What's its name?" Solinvar, who had counseled emperors and shaped the fate of civilizations, found that he had no answer prepared. He thought for a moment. "Perhaps you should name it," he said. "I'll call it Star," Lena said, and she hugged it to her chest right there in the doorway, and Solinvar felt, through his telepathic senses, something radiating from this tiny human child that he had never expected. Not fear, not trauma, not anger. Kindness, simple, unbroken kindness. After everything that had been done to her, her heart was still open. He bowed to her, a full, formal bow, the deepest sign of respect in Rithani culture, and when he straightened up, his eyes were wet. Years later, Lena stood on the observation deck of a new space station, the successor to Axiom 9, larger and better and built with contributions from 60 species. She was 15 now, tall for her age, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's quiet confidence. She leaned against the railing and watched the stars. A small alien girl, a Brevari child, barely 4 feet tall, with soft blue fur and wide, nervous eyes, approached her slowly. The Brevari were a timid species, often bullied by larger races, and this child clearly expected to be ignored or brushed aside. Lena turned and smiled at her. "Hi," she said. "I'm Lena. Want me to show you around?" The Brevari girl blinked in surprise, then nodded shyly. They walked together down the corridor, the human girl pointing out windows and explaining which stars were which, the alien girl listening with growing wonder. Behind them, a Dravari diplomat watched from the far side of the concourse. He was young, born after the incident, raised in the reformed Dominion. He did not look away in anger. He looked away in something quieter and more complicated. Respect, perhaps, or gratitude, or the simple, heavy understanding that the universe is shaped not by the species that fight the hardest, but by the ones that, after fighting, choose to be kind. The galaxy had asked, many times in the years since the Velen incident, why humans protected their young so fiercely, why they had built secret fleets and hidden weapons and prepared for decades, all to keep their children safe, why a single 7-year-old girl had been enough to wake a sleeping giant. The answer was always the same, and it was always simple. Because they remembered what it was to be small.